Hello, everyone. I want to welcome you to this evening's presentation of Staying Well in Weird Times. My name is Cal Workman. I'm with the Manchester Community Library, and it is my pleasure to introduce Daniel Merges, who is our presenter this evening. Daniel is a licensed clinical mental health counselor at United Counseling Service in Bennington, who has been working with individuals, children, and families since 2012. He comes from a family of helping professionals and peacemakers. He is passionate about listening deeply, advocacy, and self-determination. He also has a master's degree in clinical mental health and substance abuse counseling from Johnson State College in Vermont and a graduate certificate in autism studies from UCLA with additional training in EMDR and play therapy. In addition to his work as a therapist, Daniel consults and trains mental health professionals and educators in developing trauma-informed practices and healthy, caring communities. Welcome and thank you, Daniel. One note before we get started actually is I want to let you all know we are recording this session we have heard from a few groups that asked, couldn't join us this evening, but they asked if we could record it for them. Before we post it though, we will strip everybody's, faces and your information from that final cut. So you will not be included in that final form. And with that, I guess I would say, Daniel, would you like to have people put questions in chat or tell us how you'd like us to engage with you in your presentation?
Yeah, there are a couple of options. For folks who haven't used Zoom before, at the bottom of your screen, you should see a bar that has a few gray icons on them, and toward the middle, there is one that says chat, and it has a little talk box. If you tap on that and open it up, you'll be able to type messages to the whole group. And another option is there might be times when I just ask people to talk, and you can turn on your microphone. Everyone's microphone is off at the moment, I think. To turn it on, you just go to the little red microphone icon and click on that, and it'll turn your microphone on. So thanks, Cal, for that formal introduction, and that will be the most formal part of what we do this evening. And the one part that wasn't in the bio is that I'm also a human being living through a global pandemic. And that gives all of us something in common, right? I'm going to share my screen now, and I have a few PowerPoint slides to go through. It'll take me just a minute to get those up. All right. Okay, so the theme tonight is staying well in weird times. So what this is this is an opportunity for us to connect and share some ideas and have a dialogue. My style of presenting is pretty interactive. I'll be looking to hear what you all think about the ideas that I've brought. What this is not going to be is a lecture or a pep rally or an attempt to force you to feel positively about a really terrible time in human history. And I'm also not going to shame you for feeling down if that's where you're at. I think it's really important for us to be accepting and realistic about where we all are at this time. So the next slide, remember that class that we all took in high school that was called How to Survive a Global Pandemic? Like, raise your hand or, wave if you took that class in high school. That's a rhetorical question, of course, because none of us took that class. We have all found ourselves in the midst of a global pandemic, which is something that none of us were prepared for. We didn't do anything to cause it. We didn't do anything to deserve it. And here we are dealing with it. So now, I'd like to open it up and, have kind of a conversation, and people are welcome to type things in the chat. And maybe Cal, if you could keep track of the chat and read things that come up. And other folks can feel free to, because we aren't a really big group, you can turn your microphones on. I'm just interested in ideas about how your wellness, however you define that, has been impacted by things that are happening right now, like COVID, winter, isolation, stress, or any other factors. How's your wellness been affected?
Oh.
I'm a professional counselor, so I'm okay sitting with awkward silences.
We have someone here who said that she's getting much less exercise. And another comment, the first snowstorm was hard because this commenter felt more isolated than ever.
Yeah, yeah. Isolation, that's a big thing.
Mm-hmm. Another comment, I am lonely.
Yeah, yeah. I really appreciate people sharing about what's really going on for them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think these are really common themes.
Yep. And here's another, I relied on my workplace for exercise because it has a fitness center. No replacement for that.
Yeah. 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 So our wellness has been impacted in a lot of ways. I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. So my next question for us to share with each other is, what did you used to do to take care of yourself that's now difficult, impossible, different?
Hmm.
I know for me, I miss seeing people's faces. That's one of the things I do like about Zoom, is that I can see people's faces when we're talking. But it's weird just having like casual contacts with people. It's like the person checking me out at the grocery store. It's weird not seeing their faces.
Yeah, or their smile. I mean, their expression. We use our the mouth is a big part of how you judge reactions.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, our brains are wired to pay attention to all sorts of little tiny muscles in our faces. Yeah.
We have a comment here, seeing family and friends, having novel outings. And another comment, I would take seminars and do activities various organizations would offer. And I'm sure this is common for a lot of folks. I used to visit good friends at least twice a week, said.
Yeah. Yeah, all that in-person stuff that we used to do that it's not safe to do right now.
I find myself thinking of something to do, thinking I can do it, and then realizing I have to back out of it because I can't, or it's feels too risky.
Yeah. I can relate to that. I find myself often thinking, oh, this would be a great weekend to do something. And I'm like, oh, no, we can't do that. Haven't been able to do it in almost a year, and we still can't do it. Part of what is really difficult for people right now with the pandemic is the ambiguity about the end of it. It's easier to deal with things when we know how long they're going to last, or we know when the end is. Like if we're having a really bad work day, we know that it ends at 5 o'clock, so we can get through it. But this is, we know we're that people are doing some things to help get us closer to whenever the end will be. But even like how we define the end, that's not defined yet. So that ambiguity that can be really hard on people. In my mind, I think of those big things that we're really struggling to know and we can't know, like almost like an existential stress for us, because our minds are really wired to want to know things and to understand things. And when there's something so big that impacts so many areas of our life as this, and we don't know when the end is, that's its own kind of distress.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. All right, so with the idea of wellness and well-being, there are a lot of different ways to talk about it. And in preparing for this, I just Googled like domains of well-being, or different types of well-being. And you can find lists like the 4 domains of well-being and the 8 domains of well-being and the 12 domains of well-being. So there are a lot of different ways to talk about wellness and well-being. And I just picked a few for us to talk about tonight. And these are pretty big ones, and ones that we all experience and can relate to. So the ones that I chose for tonight are physical, mental, and emotional, because they're kind of closely connected, and social. Um, so with physical well-being, again, there are many different aspects of physical well-being that we can talk about. Um, and I just picked a few, and these are really big things that have a really big impact on our lives. Um, so if you are doing really well with a couple of these, that's good. If you're doing well with 3 out of 4, that's great. If you're doing well with all 4, then you're probably doing pretty well generally. Um, the first one is eating and drinking, like being mindful about what we're putting into our body in terms of fuel. Um, and that can change when things get stressful. And I wonder if anyone has noticed changes in their eating or drinking habits, or patterns in the last however long it's been, 17 years we've been in this pandemic.
Yeah.
Yeah. What changes have people noticed in how you're eating or drinking?
Mm.
One that my brother has mentioned, on his way to work, he drives past a liquor store, and this has been really busy since the beginning of the pandemic. Um, that's a change for a lot of people. They're home more, drinking more alcohol. Um, there are pros and cons to that. Comfort foods. Yeah, someone wrote comfort foods and more food. Yeah, a lot of people are familiar with the kitchen seems closer than ever for cooking. Craving chocolate, thinking about cooking and baking. Yeah, right. Because we're at home, we're closer to our food, and someone else drinking more coffee. Yeah, a lot of people are, everyone is spending more time at home for sure. And many people who are still working are working from home. So they're closer to their kitchen, they have more access to food. And, there's a popular expression about eating your feelings. Or stress eating is another one. Um, a lot of people eat more and eat comfort foods. Um, and comfort foods often, I think for most people, are usually different than like the healthy, what we think of as like healthy foods that support the health of our body. Um, Another comment, less scheduled time and eating more. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so all these changes that may not be supporting the health of our bodies. My general advice about eating, um, I try not to have really strict rules for myself or other people, but I do say that most of the food you eat most of the time should be to support the health of your body. Um, because I know there are a lot of different reasons that we eat. We eat for celebration. We eat to connect with people. We eat because it's part of a tradition, maybe a family tradition, a cultural tradition, a religious tradition, and a lot of people eat when they're stressed out or when they're feeling bad. Um, some people, when they're stressed out or feeling not well, don't eat as much. And that's another way that um, eating could be affected. Um, and in terms of drinking, I think it's pretty widely known these days that drinking a lot of water is good for you. And the idea of drinking 8 cups of water a day, that's been around for a while. I don't know where that came from, but it seems to be pretty popular. Uh, and let me go back to sharing the screen and see where we're at. Yeah, next one up is sleeping. Sleep is really important, and some of us are better at it than others. So when I'm asking people about how they're sleeping, I ask questions like, do you have trouble falling asleep? Like when you decide it's time for sleep and you lay down, do you get to sleep quickly? Is it fairly peaceful? Or, some people, their minds stay pretty busy. They have trouble falling asleep. They may lay awake for a while. Oh, yeah. There's another comment in the chat that the media is not helping at all regarding eating, for sure. They say bake some cookies and open a bottle of wine. Yeah. And those are the kind of things that are like, in terms of how I relate to those from the perspective of mental health, say those are coping strategies that can be effective in the moment. So they make sense, no judgment, but in the long term, you might want to choose something more healthy as a regular coping skill. All right, so back to sleeping. So I usually ask people, do you have trouble falling asleep or do you get to sleep? When you are asleep, do you stay asleep or do you wake up in the night? If you do wake up, do you get back to sleep easily? And then the other big one is, do you feel like you get enough sleep? Or when you wake up in the morning, do you feel rested when you get out of bed? So having said those things, how do people think they are in terms of sleep? Like give yourself a rating in the chat, scale from 1 to 5. 1 is I'm a pretty poor sleeper. I don't feel rested when I wake up. I wake up several times in the night. I have trouble falling asleep. So that's a 1. A 5 is like you're a superstar sleeper. You get at least 8 hours every night. When your head hits the pillow, you're out and you don't wake up until the morning. So in the chat, give yourself a sleep rating. I'm going to give myself like a 3. Oh, a lot of 3s. Varies from day to day. That is a good, honest answer. I like that. Yeah, a 1. All right. Yeah, yeah. And the thing about sleep is it's really important for, yeah, 3 and strange dreams. Yeah, sleep is really important for our overall well-being. It supports our physical health, our mental health. They're really important. They're really important processes that happen in our sleep, like tissue regeneration throughout our body. Something I'm really interested in is memory reconsolidation happens in our sleep. So it's really, it's linked to our memory and our ability to access memories. Good sleep supports all of those things. And of course, conversely, poor sleep makes those things harder. And poor sleep makes everything harder. It makes it harder to engage with people, makes it harder to be pleasant. Everything is harder if you're getting poor sleep. So I'll share screen again. All right, so sleeping, that's important. Also moving, so that's just like the idea that our bodies they're kind of made to move. We've got all these joints, like dozens of joints throughout our body. That means our bodies are made to move. And regular movement or exercise, people relate to those words differently. That's really important to the health of our bodies as well. Even a little bit of walking, if you can do it a few times a week, great. Short walk every day, awesome. More vigorous exercise is even better if you're able to do that. Um, and that's something that people have found different ways to do during the pandemic. And Cal and I were talking just before we started about different things, different places that have been impacted, like gyms have all been shut down. So a lot of people used to exercise at a gym, but that is generally, people are thinking that's not safe because people are breathing really heavily and in close proximity. So a lot of gyms are closed. So people have had to get more creative about moving. Um, my mother was talking to a friend a few weeks ago who had been exposed to someone with COVID and had to quarantine for a couple of weeks. And where he lives, it was kind of difficult for him to be outside of his apartment and not exposing other people just because of the floor plan. So he spent almost all of his time for a couple of weeks in his apartment, and he was just walking laps around his living room just to keep himself moving. So people have had to get creative about movement. And then breathing. Breathing's an interesting thing because we're all doing it all the time. And if we're doing it well, it really supports the health of our body. And something related to the health of our bodies and our minds, and breathing, is the idea of paying attention to our breath. Like many people are familiar with breathing exercises. Some might be familiar with breathing exercises from sports or athletics. Some people are familiar with breathing exercises from yoga practice or something similar to that, or from meditation practice. And what's really unique about breathing is that it's the only process that's happening inside our body that I can think of that we can affect and control to a large degree just with our thoughts. For example, if I said, "Hey Cal, I want you to slow down your digestion right now. Just like think about it and slow your digestion down." You can't do that. Um, or if I said, I want you to increase the rate at which your lungs are exchanging oxygen into your blood. You can't do that just by thinking about it, but you can affect how you're breathing. You can affect the rate, the depth, the evenness of your breathing. And this is one of the things that the last slide has a list of resources, and I've emailed the slides to Cal, so she'll have them and can share them with people. But there is a link to a page with some breathing exercises on it. The thing about breathing and why it is a handy thing to focus on to support your health is that it is, not only is it something that you can change just by thinking about it, but slowing your breath down, making it more deep and more regular, has a calming effect on your nervous system. And some people are familiar with that. Some people haven't practiced that before. And part of the advantage of working with the breath is that it's portable, it goes where you go, and it's always available. As long as you're alive, you're still breathing. So it's a really handy thing to focus on. And the link I sent is to a website for a naturopathic doctor called Andrew Weil, who I can never remember what southwestern state he's in, but he's out there somewhere. And he says that breathing, he calls it the master key to good health. And he says it's the first thing he teaches all of his clients, all of his patients, is how to pay attention to their breathing. And I'm going to just do a quick time check, see where we are. Yeah, we've got plenty of time. So what I'd like to do now is just talk us through a really simple breathing activity and ask everyone to give it a try, and share when we're done. And it'll only take us a minute or two to do it. So the first thing is something that supports any breathing activity is an upright posture. So if you're sitting in a chair, sit up straight if you can, if that's comfortable for your body. If it's not, that's okay. You can also do this lying down if that's more comfortable for you. And just get a sense, try to get a feel for whatever's underneath your body and supporting your body. So if you're in a chair, have a feeling, get a sense of the seat underneath your legs holding you up. Try to get a sense of your feet being on the floor. Just notice gravity is kind of holding you in place. And then all we're going to do is notice our breathing. We're not going to try to change it in any way. You don't need to make it go any slower or faster. No need to worry about it. We're just going to notice it. Just see if you can notice sensations related to breathing. Notice if your chest is rising and falling. Maybe your stomach is moving a little in and out. And see if you notice any other movements. Maybe you can notice your shoulders moving a little bit as you breathe. See if you can notice the sensation of your breath coming in and out of your body at the breath. If your mouth is open, see if you can notice the feeling of your breath passing over your tongue or your lips. If you're breathing through your nose, see if you can notice the sensation of the air passing through your nostrils or over the space above your lip, below your nose. And just notice it. Again, we're not trying to change the breath, do anything with it, just notice it. We'll just take a few more breaths and we'll talk about how that was. Now, as we're coming back together, just notice how your breath is now, the rate or the depth of it, and see how it compares to when we started this just a minute or two ago. So now I'd like people to share what you noticed about breathing. Maybe like how it made you feel, if you were able to notice the things I was encouraging you to notice, if you noticed your breath changing at all in doing that. Yeah. So someone wrote, quieter mind, less chatter ping-ponging inside my head. Yeah. What other things did people notice? What about the rate of your breath? Did anyone notice, did the rate of your breathing stay about the same? Did it get a little faster or slower? Yeah, yeah. That almost always happens. Just noticing your breath, it slows down a little. Someone wrote, shoulders more relaxed, breaths got deeper, slower and deeper. Yeah, yeah. You know, the prompts were just to notice breathing. And naturally, just paying attention to your breath, naturally it slows down a little. And someone wrote in the comments, their mind was quieter too. And that's part of that special connection between our breath and our mind, is that when we pay attention to our breathing and it gets quieter, our mind usually gets quieter too. That's not always the case. Sometimes when our breathing gets quiet, we might notice that our mind is really busy, and that's okay. That's just another thing that we can just notice. Um, but the great thing about that, that's the first breathing exercise that I use with clients that I'm working with. And the thing I like about it is it's not asking you to develop any new skills. And for some people, trying to slow down their breathing feels a little uncomfortable for them. And if you go to that page that's in the resources about Dr. Andrew Weil and his teaching on breathing, the three things he says that are the goals for better breathing are making your breathing slower, deeper, and more regular. So those are kind of like the general goals with breathing. If you do that, it has a positive impact on your health. And we just did that by just noticing our breathing. We didn't have to try to do anything. It naturally went to that state of slower, deeper, and more regular that supports our health. And that's the kind of thing that, again, breath is portable. You can do it anywhere, anytime. It can be a really nice practice in the evening before you go to bed, or as you're laying in bed trying to go to sleep. Just notice your breathing has a nice quieting effect on the body and the mind. And something I encourage you to do as often as you think of it, and maybe even consider writing a little reminder to yourself. Putting it on a note, posting it somewhere in your house where you'll see it. Or if you're someone who has a cell phone that they look at pretty regularly, set a reminder alarm in your cell phone to go off once or twice a day. Just spend a minute or two paying attention to your breathing. All right. So I'm going to go back to sharing the screen. Okay. Newsflash, you're a mammal. This is something that is a topic I like to talk about, where we are lots of amazing things as human beings, and we have the ability to do really extraordinary things with our very complex minds. And it's good to remember that we're mammals too. Regardless of how much time we spend in our minds are inside a body that is mammal. And to me, I like to keep that in mind because it helps me to be accepting and kind with myself when I notice seasonal changes. And sometimes things feel really different in the winter than they do in the warmer weather. And the word at the top of this slide is wintering. And I borrowed that from a podcast conversation I heard recently from the NPR program On Being. And there's also a link to that. There's a conversation about this idea of wintering, which is the way I understood it. The guest that was talking about wintering was talking about the changes that we go through in the winter and ways of kind of honoring the changes in the seasons and our bodies and how they affect us. So I wonder if people would share for a moment just things that you notice in your own life that might feel a little different in the winter than at other times of year. Less sun, less energy. Yeah. Yeah. In the winter, I feel like I'm a house plant. Like if I don't get enough sun, I'm just going to wither. Going to bed earlier, restlessness and cabin fever. I put mild depression in there because like I had to accept at some point that that's a real thing. Like I get mildly depressed in the winter. I miss the daylight. You want to sleep more. Yeah. Yeah. And that, to me, that makes a lot of sense because when we look to the natural world and how winter happens, mammals are usually doing a lot more sleeping. Some of them are just sleeping for months on end, right? You know, a lot of mammals hibernate, not all of them, but even the ones that don't, they're spending more time sheltering, um, huddling for warmth.
Mm.
Um, so I think it's a really natural change that people experience in the winter when they want to do things to, like, when they want to sleep more, stay home more, um, do things that feel warm and cozy, drinking more tea and wrapping yourself up in a couple of blankets and watching something on Netflix. Those things make sense to me. And sometimes I think culturally we can experience pressure to um, to do things, you know, to be busy. Maybe we have commitments like work or volunteering or other things that we do in the community, and we can often feel kind of a pressure to do that. And then winter comes along, and it might feel like we don't want to do as much of that stuff. Um, so my encouragement around that is, oh, I don't think I'm sharing the screen at the moment. Let me get back to that. No, not that one. All right. Um, so to think about, you know, what can you give yourself permission to do? Um, because sometimes we need to give ourselves permission to do something like, um, you know, maybe not do a thing that's usually in our schedule. Maybe it's sleep a little more, sleep a little later. Um, Maybe it's just sleep in on a Saturday instead of scrubbing the bathroom or whatever you were planning on doing that Saturday. And it's something I encourage you to think about is what can you give yourself permission to do that makes sense just in this context of wintering, of honoring the changes that happen in us because we are part of the natural world, and it makes sense that changes in the natural world affect us. And a question I've been thinking about a lot lately, it's at the bottom of this slide, is what would happen if you did nothing? And for me, that's been really interesting and enjoyable to think about. And thinking about, you know, choosing to do nothing is it's a choice. It's a choice not to change what you're doing. So it might be staying in bed a little longer, or it might be not going out to the store for a trip that isn't really essential, and just staying home and reading a book, sipping tea, spending time snuggling with a dog or a cat. Those are all good things. I'm going to click to the next slide. So now we're going to shift to talking about social well-being. The pandemic has made much of what we want to do in terms of our social well-being difficult. And some things to think about related to that are, what do we really need? Because, you know, in life, there's often a significant difference between what we want and what we really need. And then we also have to think about, like, what is possible at this time. And I think a big part of conversations that I've been a part of, particularly in this past year, about social well-being, the topic of connection comes up pretty regularly. And I think people experience that differently, um, but it seems to be really fundamental to the social well-being part, is that you know, there's a part of us that needs not just to be in the presence of other people, but to feel a sense of connection with them. So I'm wondering if people would share in the chat some things that you do or you could do, you might consider doing, to experience a sense of connection that works for these weird times during the pandemic. What can we do to experience more connection? Calling friends. Yeah. Yeah, those people that you can't see as often. Call them on the phone. Yeah, FaceTime. I think it's a great idea. It gives your mind more input about the other person when you can see their face, not just hear their voice. Talk to your neighbor in the driveway with a mask. Yeah, yeah. Talk to people, wear a mask, keep the appropriate distance. Um, yeah, talk to people. What else are people doing? Walk with a friend with a mask. Yeah. Yeah, in the last year, I've often seen people walking and they're walking on opposite sides of the road. You tell they're together and they're having a conversation, but they're on opposite sides of the road wearing masks. Yeah. And I remember I was aware of it particularly toward the beginning of the pandemic when people were feeling pretty isolated, that a lot of people were trying to figure out ways to do social activities using Zoom by video. So people were, sharing videos of doing Zoom dates and Zoom family gatherings or Zoom cocktail hours, where a few friends would all be at their own homes preparing their own cocktails, but they would have their cameras on and they would be talking with their friends, trying to find ways to be connected when we can't be in the physical presence of people that we care about. And the opposite of connection is isolation, and that's something that many people experience and struggle with when there's not a global pandemic. And the global pandemic has just it's made it more pronounced and more widespread. A lot of people are feeling isolation. And one of the things, I think Cal and I talked about it briefly in a conversation in the last couple of weeks about how sometimes conversations around wellness and self-care they're overly positive, and that is really contrary to the experience of a lot of people. This is not a good time for a lot of people, and people are feeling really isolated and often depressed. So when you hear all this talk about positivity and trying to stay upbeat during the pandemic, if it's a real significant mismatch from your experience, that itself can make you feel more isolated. So that's part of why I said at the beginning that this is not going to be a pep rally or an attempt to shame anybody out of feeling down, because that's real. I'm going to go back to our slides. All right, mental and emotional well-being. So this is where my work brain gets interested and engaged. So a big part of mental and emotional well-being when we're experiencing something difficult is the idea of acceptance. And it's one of those things that seems like a simple concept, and most people can probably relate to it or come up with some simple definition for it. But it's certainly something that is easier said than done in many cases. It's sometimes where it would benefit us to accept things that we don't like or we don't want to accept. I would really prefer not to accept that there's a global pandemic and that it means I can't see a lot of the people that I would like to see in person. And there's a lot of people that I haven't seen in almost a year that I would really like to see in person. So there's a part of me that doesn't want to do any acceptance. But I also know that it helps me if I can practice some acceptance. And this falls under like a general category of thought for me of trying to be kind to myself. Acceptance is definitely a part of that. And the next idea of self-compassion um, is a part of that, trying to be compassionate toward myself. Because I think when we talk about relationships, um, we all tend to think about relationships between ourselves and other people. The people we live with, our family members, our loved ones, our partners, friends, neighbors, coworkers. Um, but we can also consider the relationship that we have with ourselves, because we experience many relationship dynamics in how we relate to ourselves and how we see ourselves in the world. And it's often the case that we're a lot harder on ourselves than we are on other people. We tend to be more critical of ourselves, less forgiving. Um, and many of us tend to say and do things to ourselves that we would never do to someone else that we care about. And there is, on the resource page, there's a link to a website, an author or researcher that teaches about self-compassion. I have a book here, the Mindful Self-Compassion Workbook. If you're looking for something along these lines to spend some time with and have some, the book it's a workbook. So there's some activities, things to think about, some writing prompts. And if you're interested in working with these ideas of how to be kind with yourself, that's a good one, the Mindful Self-Compassion Workbook. So other things related to mental and emotional well-being, the ability to cope with stress. That's another one of those things that is easier said than done. So I wonder if people would share in the chat things that they do to cope with stress. And you can be honest. It doesn't have to be all good stuff. It doesn't have to be all yoga and meditation. It can be a bottle of wine and a box of chocolate. Walk your dog. Yeah. But music, that's a good one for me. Started painting by number picture. That's great. Yeah, that's another business, another type of business that's done really well in the pandemic is art and craft and hobby suppliers. People are spending more time at home looking for things to do, ways to be creative. Yeah. Has anyone else picked up a new hobby or started practicing something they hadn't done in a long time, like playing the trumpet that had been in your closet for 20 years, or doing a puzzle for the first time in a long time? Needle felting and puzzles, yeah. One that comes up in conversations I'm having with clients frequently is time with pets. Mm-hmm. That seems to be a really good stress coping strategy. Trying to step down from high energy, like hiking, to low energy, board games, building a model, reading. Yeah, rather than going from high energy to nothing like TV. There's a lot of wisdom in there. Yeah. Yeah, step yourself down. Yeah, those are great things. Board games, building a model, reading. Yeah, a lot of people have done another business that's doing really well. Booksellers have done really well in the pandemic. Yeah. All right, let's check back in on our slides. So something that, I'm just gonna take a peek at the time. Oh, we're getting close. So something that, an activity that is really simple to do, and you will talk about it if you go looking for things around self-compassion. I also put a link to the Greater Good Science Center which is it is a research project at the University of California at Berkeley, and they focus on positivity and things that help people feel better and function better in their lives. So they have a ton of research, and they have lots of activities, workbooks, free programs, lectures. So there's a link to that in the resources as well. And a really popular activity is practicing gratitude. And there's been a fair amount of research on gratitude practices in the last 20 years. And the things that seem to be most effective are when it is practiced regularly and when it's expressed. Those seem to be pretty important parts. So like a good practice to do daily, be at the end of the day, think about 3 or 4 things that you're grateful for that are unique to that day. Not just like, I'm grateful to be alive, but something specific from the day. Like, I'm really grateful for how great that beef stew turned out for dinner tonight. Or I'm really grateful for the kind thing that a neighbor did for me. And the more you express it, the greater an effect it has. So if you, for example, write a thank you note to someone and you turn that into a regular practice, do that a couple times a week, that's really good for you. And, oh, sorry, I flipped through a couple slides there. So at the bottom of the slide is a question that people sometimes have, which is how do I know if I or a loved one needs professional help? And this is a really significant question when it comes to emotional and mental health. And the general guidance around that is when you notice impairment in functioning in some part of their life. So if someone who you normally talk to once a week, you haven't talked to them in a few weeks, and you've left a couple of messages, they haven't returned your call, check in on them. There might be something going on. Or if you find yourself stuck in a place where you're feeling really anxious most of the time, really depressed most of the time, and it goes on day after day, it might be time to check in with a professional. And a good place to start with that is to call your primary care doctor, just tell them what's going on. They might give you a referral. Or you can always call, in Bennington County, you can call UCS 24 hours a day. In the evenings and overnights, we have crisis clinicians that are on call. There's always someone who can talk to you about whatever is going on. And we have just a few minutes left. I'm going to try to get through 1 or 2 more slides. So this is another, it's a pair of questions that go together that I've been reflecting on a lot in the last couple of weeks. I feel like it's been really helpful for me in a couple of areas of my life. Just thinking about, what do I want to hold on to and what do I want to let go of? And when I use those questions focused in certain areas, I find it helps me to really get through some stuff that might feel foggy, or I'm having difficulty articulating. So, examples from what we've been talking about tonight might be in terms of what you're doing in a week. Like maybe you feel like you're really busy and there's a part of you that really wants to slow down. So what do you want to hold on to? And what do you want to let go of? So maybe, you might want to hold on to a certain, certain phone calls with friends, or a volunteer activity, or a certain number of hours at work. And maybe what you want to let go of is some other commitment, or, driving someplace to go to a store that's not absolutely necessary. And similarly, you can do it with your physical health too. What do you want to hold on to? Maybe it's exercise. Maybe it's trying to eat more fruits and vegetables. And what do you want to let go of? maybe it's sugar or soda or um, something like that. And I think I'm just about at the end of my slides. Yeah, there's the last one, resources. So I'll just read through these quickly. I mentioned the Greater Good Science Center a few minutes ago, tons of good stuff on that website. The breathing practices that Dr. Andrew Weil teaches, there's a link there. Mindful self-compassion, there's a link there. The conversation about wintering that I mentioned, there's a link to that podcast. And there's also a link to a CDC page about sleep hygiene. There's some good ideas there. So that brings us to 8 o'clock on my clock. And I'm happy to stick around for a few minutes if people have questions. And Cal, if you are okay with leaving the meeting open for a few minutes. But I want to thank you all for joining us on the screen tonight. And I wish you all really well in taking care of yourself and the people that you love. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you, everyone, for coming.
You're welcome.
I'm wondering if you have some more tips. I know that you've given us a great resource, but on sleep, because
Yeah.
I'll speak for myself. My sleep is all over the map. There are days that I wake up at 4 or earlier, and other nights I'm asleep on the couch. I'd already be asleep on the couch.
Yeah. I want to address that. And there's a question in the email. Is there a way to get a list of resources sent? Cal, can you just email that to everybody who?
I think I can. I think I can through registration, but
Okay.
and I'm going to reach out to this person right now. Yes, I know those are some great resources.
Yeah. Okay.
And
Yeah.
we'll be taping this too.
Mhm.
And that will go on our YouTube channel, and we'll share it with UCS too.
All right. Yeah. So a few quick things about good sleep hygiene. Um, Things that you want to do. One of the most important things is to have a routine. It's particularly important to your evening routine, how you wind down in the time that you go to bed. Try to make that as consistent as you can. And in terms of preparing yourself for good sleep, things you want to avoid are things you want to avoid in the evening are big meals, and the later the worse they are for your sleep. Alcohol in the evening, which is hard because for some people that's part of social customs, cultural customs. But alcohol, even though it might make you feel sleepy initially, it tends to disturb sleep in the middle of the night. So avoid big meals, avoid alcohol and caffeine, depending on how sensitive you are, which varies widely. I know some people who drink caffeine any time of day or night, and they go to sleep and they're fine. Me, like, I know if I drink caffeine on a Tuesday, it'll still be messing up my sleep on a Thursday. I'm ridiculously sensitive to it. So caffeine, alcohol, big meals, and screens. Those are things that are present in a lot of our lives, and they mess up our sleep. So with screens, you want to make sure that you're absolutely not looking at screens within an hour of your scheduled bedtime. And the more you can back that off, if you can make it 2 hours, great, that's even better for you. Because the blue light, it makes our brains busy, and it's harder for them to quiet down to get ready for sleep. And other things about sleep, pay attention to like the temperature of the room that you're in. In general, sleeping in a room that's a little bit cooler and having some blankets on is preferable to a room that's really warm. And make the room as quiet and as dark as you can, right? Those are good sleep conditions. But the big thing is like, preparing yourself in the evening. There are some other things, like we talked about the things to avoid, but things you can do. Somebody told me years ago that chamomile tea is really good in the evening. So chamomile tea, making yourself like, quieting down. Like if you're listening to music, listen to softer music, that kind of stuff. Think quiet things. Think like you're an airplane coming in for a landing in the land of sleep. What do you want to do on your approach? You want things to be quiet, that sort of stuff. That's all I've got on sleep.
Thank you.
All right. And you're welcome to everybody that's saying thank you in the chat. And what do you think, Cal? Is that a good place to wrap things up?
I think that's a great place to wrap things up. I want to say thank you all again, and thank you, Daniel. Thank you for you.
Yeah, really happy to do this. All right.